He carried a drunk stranger through a rainstorm, a woman he'd never met, and laid her on his couch, while his 8-year-old daughter slept 10 feet away. By morning, that one decision would cost him his reputation, put his job on the line, and land him in the office of the most powerful man in the company. The boss looked at him across that massive desk and asked 3 words nobody expected. "Where did you find her?" What happened next will make you question everything you think you know about who gets rewarded in this world and who gets overlooked. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if stories like this hit home for you, subscribe. You won't want to miss what comes next. Daniel Carter had a rule he'd lived by for 11 years, ever since the night paramedics wheeled his wife out of their house, and she never came back. Don't make it harder than it already is. That was the whole rule. 4 words, no exceptions. Don't take on more than you can carry. Don't reach out when reaching out might backfire. Don't put yourself in situations you can't explain to your daughter's school counselor at 8 o'clock on a Monday morning. He was 36 years old. He drove a 2011 Ford F-150 with a cracked passenger mirror that he kept meaning to fix. He made $54,000 a year maintaining the heavy freight trucks for Bennett Global Logistics, checking brake lines, rotating CIF-X filings, the maintenance reports that nobody ever read unless something broke. He lived in a 2-bedroom house in Joliet, Illinois, 28 miles southwest of downtown Chicago, in a neighborhood where the houses looked like they were holding their breath. He had 1 credit card, a balance of $1,200 on it, and a savings account with enough to cover 3 months of emergencies. He had a daughter named Lily, who was 8 years old, and drew horses on every surface that would hold a pencil. That was his life, and most days that was enough. The night everything changed was a Thursday in late November, and it was the kind of cold that Chicago manufactures specifically to remind you that nature is not your friend. Daniel had just finished a 12-hour shift. His hands were still raw from the wind that blew through the maintenance bay every time someone opened the south roll-up door. He had not eaten since noon. His knees ached. He was driving home on Route 30 when he saw the lights of a bar called Vaginti's, a low-slung building with a Miller Lite sign buzzing in the window, and decided to pull in. Not for a drink. He didn't drink. Not since Lily was born, actually, and that was a choice he'd made quietly, without announcement. The same way he made most of his choices. He wanted food. McGinty's had a kitchen that stayed open until midnight and made a beef stew that was better than it had any right to be, given that the place smelled like carpet cleaner and old ambitions. He parked, went inside, ordered his stew to go, and stood at the bar waiting. That was when he heard it. Not a crash, not a scream. Just a sound that he couldn't quite name at first. A kind of soft, wet thud, followed by the scrape of a bar stool, followed by silence. He turned. At the far end of the bar, near the booths by the window, a woman had knocked over her glass. She was sitting on her stool, but barely. One hand gripping the bar like it was the only solid thing left in the world. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than Daniel made, in a weak dark green, silk, or something close to it, with the kind of simple cut that doesn't draw attention to itself, but somehow makes you look anyway. She was heavyset, probably early 30s, dark hair that had been done up carefully at some point in the evening, and was now mostly escaping, whatever it had been pinned with. Her mascara had run, not a little, a lot. The bartender wiped up the spilled drink with a rag and moved away without saying a word. The 2 men sitting at the bar 3 stools down glanced at her, made a brief eye contact with each other, and looked back at their beers. The couple in the nearest booth looked over, looked at each other, and went back to their phones. Nobody moved. Daniel turned back to the bar. He looked at the television above the liquor bottles, which was showing a college basketball game with the sound turned down. He looked at the order ticket the bartender had slapped on the spike. Due to go, Carter. He thought about Lily, who was at Mrs. Petrova's next door, which was where she went on his late shifts. Mrs. Petrova was 71. And fell asleep before 9, and didn't mind if Lily stayed up reading as long as she was in bed. By the time the old woman checked at 10, he thought about his rule. Don't make it harder than it already is. Then the woman at the end of the bar stood up. She made it about 2 steps before her legs stopped cooperating. She grabbed the back of an empty chair. The chair slid. She went down, not all the way, not flat on the floor, but one knee hit the ground, and she made a sound that was half grunt and half something else, something that came from a place deeper than embarrassment. Still, nobody moved. Daniel was already moving. He covered the length of the bar in about 6 steps and got to her before anyone else decided to make a decision. He crouched down beside her, not grabbing her, just being there. "Hey," he said. "Hey, I got you." She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark brown and completely unfocused. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was clear, actually more articulate than he expected, for someone who clearly wasn't fine. "I just need a minute." "Okay," he said. "Take it." She looked at him for a second, like she wasn't sure what to do with that answer. Most men, she would learn later, didn't just say okay. Most men either grabbed her, trying to help in a way that felt like ownership, or stepped back and offered commentary. "You should have eaten something. You had too much. Let me call you a cab, sweetheart." Daniel just crouched there. "Can you stand?" he asked. "Yes," she said. She couldn't on the first try. He offered his arm without making a production of it, just put it there, solid, available, the way you'd hand someone a tool they needed. She took it, and he helped her upright. "Thank you," she said. She was trying to reassemble herself, pushing her hair back, reaching for her purse, with the hand that wasn't holding his arm. "Do you have someone you can call?" he asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. Something moved across her face, not drunk confusion, but something more complicated and more sober. Like she'd just asked herself that question and didn't like the answer. "I have a driver," she said finally. I think I called him." He said, 20 minutes, okay." Daniel looked around. McGinty's was not a place you wanted to wait alone in the condition she was in. The 2 men at the bar had turned around on their stools and were watching now with the relaxed attention of people watching a TV show. They hadn't chosen, but weren't going to change. "You want to sit back down? Or there's a booth over here that's—" "How much did you see?" she asked. He looked at her. "Enough to stop." She nodded once, slowly, like she was filing that away. They moved to the booth by the window. Daniel flagged down the bartender and asked for a glass of water, which arrived without comment. He sat across from her, not too close, not hovering, and watched her drink the water in small, careful sips. "I don't normally," she started. "You don't have to explain anything to me," he said. She looked at him again. Same measuring look. "You're not going to ask me why I'm here alone. Not my business. Or why I'm—" She gestured at herself. A gesture that seemed to encompass everything: the dress, the running mascara, the fact of her body, the whole tableau. Like this. "Also not my business." She laughed. It was a short laugh, surprised out of her, like it arrived before she had time to decide whether she wanted to produce it. "Most men ask. I'm not most men." She picked up the water glass again. Outside, rain had started, a hard November rain that hit the windows sideways and made the parking lot look like something you wouldn't want to go out into. Her phone buzzed. She looked at it, and something went wrong in her face. "My driver canceled," she said. "He said the roads." She shook her head. "He does this when it rains." "Where do you live?" "Lincoln Park, Chicago's north side. An hour in normal traffic. More in rain."
Daniel thought about the rideshare apps that never came when you needed them in the suburbs.
About the fact that this woman in a silk dress could barely stand up. About the 2 men at the bar who were still watching. He thought about Lily asleep at Mrs. Petrova's. He thought about what he would want a stranger to do for his daughter. "I can drive you," he said. She looked at him. "I don't know you," she said. "I know." He reached into his back pocket and pulled out his work ID badge, Bennett Global Logistics, with his photo and his name, and the little blue stripe that meant maintenance staff. He set it on the table between them. "Daniel Carter. I've worked for the company on that badge for 10 years. My truck is the red F-150 in the parking lot. License plate, 641 Tango Foxtrot. If you want, you can take a picture of the plate before we go." She stared at the badge for a long moment. Then she looked up at him and said, "You're very practical about this." "I have a daughter," he said. "I think about what I'd want for her." Something shifted in her eyes. Not dramatically, just shifted. "Okay," she said, "okay." But they didn't make it to Lincoln Park. They made it about 4 blocks before she said, "I'm going to be sick, and he pulled into a gas station parking lot, and she was sick, and afterward she sat in the passenger seat, with her eyes closed and said, in a small voice that was nothing like the controlled voice she'd used in the bar, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It's fine," he said. "I can't go home like this," she said. "My father," she stopped. "I can't." He thought about it for exactly 4 seconds. "You can sleep it off at my place," he said. "I've got a couch." "Lily, my daughter, she's at the neighbor's. You'd have the place to yourself until morning." She opened her eyes and looked at him. "Why would you do that?" she asked. And Daniel Carter, who was not a man given to speeches, who had said more words in the last 20 minutes than he usually said in an entire shift, thought about it honestly. "Because it's raining," he said, "and you need somewhere to be. And I'm not going to leave you at a gas station." She was quiet for a moment. "Olivia," she said. "What?" "My name, Olivia." "Daniel," he said. "I think you saw that on the badge." "Daniel," she repeated, like she was fixing it somewhere reliable in her memory. He pulled out of the gas station. The rain hit the windshield in sheets. The wipers slapped back and forth. She fell asleep before they reached the highway. His house on Millbrook Lane was a 3-bedroom ranch that he'd bought with Susan 9 years ago when they were still planning a future that included more children and a garden and maybe a bigger kitchen someday. The 3rd bedroom was still full of boxes he hadn't opened since the move. He got Olivia from the truck to the couch. Without incident, she was half awake and cooperative, if not entirely coherent. He got her shoes off, found the blanket from the hall closet, and set a glass of water and 2 Tylenol on the coffee table where she'd see them when she woke up. He stood in the doorway between the living room and the hall for a moment, looking at her. She'd curled onto her side, her hand tucked under her cheek. Whatever had been in her face all evening, the carefully maintained composure, the measurements she was taking of him, was gone. She just looked tired, he thought. She's somebody's daughter. He went to bed. At 7:15 the next morning, Lily Petrova, which was what Mrs. Petrova called her, because the old woman had a gift for renaming things, came through the front door with her backpack on and her hair in 2 braids that were already coming undone, and stopped dead in the living room doorway. Olivia was sitting up on the couch with the blanket around her shoulders and both hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that Daniel had left on the table before going to shower. They looked at each other. Lily said hi. Olivia said hi. Lily said, "Are you sick?" Olivia considered this. "I was last night. My dad gives me ginger ale when I'm sick." "That's..." Olivia looked down at the coffee. "That's very helpful information." Lily dropped her backpack and climbed onto the other end of the couch with the matter-of-fact unself-consciousness of 8-year-olds who have not yet learned that most situations require more careful navigation. "Ba helped you, didn't he?" she said. Ba, the Vietnamese word for father. Lily used it sometimes because Mrs. Petrova was Vietnamese American, and the word had become simply part of the household vocabulary. "Your father helped me," Olivia said carefully. "Yes. Because nobody else did?" Olivia blinked. "How did you know that?" Lily shrugged. "That's always why Ba helps. Because nobody else does." Daniel appeared in the hallway, dressed for work, with his jacket on. He looked at the 2 of them on the couch, and something passed across his face. Not quite surprise. Not quite anything he could name. "You should eat something," he told Olivia. "There's bread and eggs. You can use whatever's there. You don't have to." "I know," he said. He turned to Lily. "Bus is in 12 minutes. "I know," Lily said, sounding exactly like him. He almost smiled. "Almost." Olivia sat in Daniel Carter's kitchen for 45 minutes after they left. She ate 2 pieces of toast with the grape jelly that was on the 3rd shelf of the refrigerator, next to a juice box and something in a container labeled "Lily's Soup, Not for Lunches," in a child's careful handwriting. The kitchen was small. The linoleum had a soft spot near the sink. The refrigerator had drawings on it, horses, mostly, but also a detailed rendering of a truck that Olivia suspected Daniel had requested, because the proportions were too careful for a child's pure invention, and it was labeled Ba's truck, with an arrow pointing to a figure in the cab. She sat with her coffee and looked around a kitchen that had never tried to impress anyone. She had grown up in a house in Winnetka that had been featured in Chicago Architecture Today when she was 12. Her childhood kitchen had been redesigned 4 times. It currently had a wine refrigerator, heated floors, and a breakfast island that seated 8. She had never eaten breakfast there alone. She picked up her phone. 17 messages. 4 from her father, Robert. 3 from her assistant. 2 from a man named Victor Hayes that she didn't open. 1 from her publicist. 6 from a group chat that she also didn't open. She called Robert. He picked up on the first ring, which meant he'd been awake for a while and waiting. Olivia. His voice was the voice he used when he was controlling something even and precise, with the warmth locked somewhere below the surface. Dad, I'm fine. Where are you? She looked at the refrigerator, at the horse drawings, at the label on Lily's soup. She paused. I'm at someone's house. He helped me last night. I needed, who? A man named Daniel Carter. He works for you, actually. Silence. Then where does he live? She gave the address. Another silence. She could hear her father's breathing, the way it changed when he was recalibrating. I'll send a car, he said. Dad, don't argue with me this morning, Olivia. She looked at the coffee in her mug. She thought about what Lily had said. That's always why Ba helps, because nobody else does. Okay, she said quietly. Okay, the car came in 40 minutes. As she was putting on her coat, she found a piece of paper on the coffee table. She must have missed it earlier. It was a note in handwriting that was careful and slightly cramped. The handwriting of someone who didn't do it often. Tylenol is on the table. More coffee in the pot. Take what you need. DC, not call me, not you owe me one, not even a phone number. Just take what you need. She folded the note and put it in the pocket of her silk dress. She was in her father's office on the 40th floor of the Bennett Global Tower by 10:30 that morning. She had showered and changed. She was wearing her professional armor-tailored blazer, dark slacks, hair back. But her hands were not quite steady when she sat down across from his desk. Robert Bennett was 64 years old and had built Bennett Global Logistics from a 2-truck freight company into a $2.4 billion enterprise over 30 years. He was a tall man who had once been physically powerful and was still, in his 60s, the kind of man who made rooms feel smaller when he entered them. He looked at her for a long moment without speaking. Tell me about last night, he said. She told him. Not everything, but enough. The bar, the canceled driver, the man who crouched down beside her without making it a performance. The house with the drawings on the refrigerator. The note. Robert listened. He was a very good listener when he chose to be, which was part of what made him formidable. Daniel Carter, he said when she was done. Maintenance. He's been with us since. He opened his laptop, checked something. 11 years, before I bought the Joliet operation. He didn't know who I was, Olivia said. I want to be clear about that. He had no idea. Robert closed the laptop, Dad. I know, he said. He stood up and walked to the window, which looked out over the Chicago skyline, over the gray November lake. I'm going to talk to him. Why? He turned. Because a man who works for me put my daughter in his car in the middle of the night and took her to his house, Olivia. What would you have me do? Send him a gift basket. He helped me, she said. Her voice was very steady. He was the only person in that bar who moved. Robert looked at her for a long moment. I'm aware of that, he said, and I intend to find out everything about it. Daniel Carter found out he had been summoned to the 40th floor at 8:52 the next morning, when his supervisor Marcus pulled him aside in the maintenance bay, with the expression of a man delivering news he didn't fully understand, but knew was significant. Bennett wants to see you, Marcus said. Robert Bennett. This morning. Daniel set down the brake caliper he'd been holding. Okay, do you know why? I have a guess. Marcus looked at him. You want to tell me what's going on? Not yet, Daniel said. Probably after. He washed his hands. He took off his coveralls. He was wearing his standard work clothes underneath dark jeans, a plaid flannel shirt, steel-toed boots. He didn't have anything else to change into. And he wasn't going to pretend that he did. He took the freight elevator to the lobby, which was as far as his badge would get him, and was met by a woman in a blazer, who said her name was Christine and walked him to the executive elevator without explanation. The 40th floor was a different planet from the maintenance bays in Joliet. It was all glass and pale wood and the particular hush that money builds for itself. Daniel walked behind Christine and kept his hands at his sides and didn't look around at things that weren't his business. The CEO's office was at the end of the hall. Robert Bennett was standing behind his desk when Daniel walked in. Not sitting, standing. which Daniel registered as a deliberate choice. They looked at each other across the room. Robert was the kind of man Daniel had worked for his whole life, powerful, accustomed to being listened to, not unkind exactly, but not someone who'd spent much time considering what it cost to be the person on the other side of the desk. "Sit down, Mr. Carter," Robert said. "I'll stand," Daniel said. "If that's all right." A pause. Something registered in Robert's eyes, not quite surprise. Just a notation. "Suit yourself." He came around the desk and sat on the edge of it, which changed the geometry of the room. "My daughter told me what happened Thursday night." "Yes, sir. I'd like to hear it from you," Daniel told him. The same way he would have told anyone. The bar. The woman on the floor. The room full of people who didn't move. The decision he'd made in about 6 seconds. The note he'd left on the coffee table. Robert listened without moving. "You didn't know who she was," he said. "No, sir. If you had known, I would have done the same thing." Daniel said it, without pausing to think about it, which Robert noticed. "You took a stranger, a woman you'd never met, to your home, with your daughter there. Lily was at the neighbor's. She came back in the morning. And you didn't think about how that might look?" Daniel looked at him steadily. "I thought about what she needed, which was somewhere safe to sleep. I thought about whether I was the right person to provide that. I decided I was. And your daughter? She spoke to her?" "They had a conversation," Daniel said. "Lily's 8. She's not afraid of people." Robert was quiet for a moment. He picked up a pen from his desk and set it back down. "She called me from your kitchen," he said. "I've never heard her sound like that." Daniel waited. "Like what?" he asked finally. Robert Bennett looked at him for a long time. "Like she'd slept," he said. And in that sentence, in those 4 words, Daniel understood something about a man he'd never met, and a daughter that man didn't fully know how to hold on to, and he understood that this meeting was going to be more complicated than he'd thought. "She told me you left her a note," Robert said. "It was just logistics," Daniel said. "Tylenol location, coffee in the pot, she kept it." Daniel didn't say anything. Robert straightened up from the desk. He put his hands in his pockets. He looked out the window for a moment at the city, at the lake, at the gray November sky, and then he looked back at Daniel. "I have a question for you, Mr. Carter." "All right. Where did you find her?" And there it was, the question. 3 words. Where did you find her? It sounded like a simple question. It wasn't. Daniel heard the layers in it, the father asking where his daughter had been. Yes, but also something else. Something that was almost, where do people like her end up when nobody's paying attention? Where do people like you come from when nobody was looking? Daniel thought about the bar, about the ring of people who'd formed a loose circle of non-intervention, about the bartender who'd wiped up the glass and moved on, about the 2 men who watched like it was entertainment. "McGinty's," he said, "Route 30, about a mile past the junction. She was at the bar and she fell, and nobody moved." Robert held his gaze. "Nobody," Daniel said. "Until I did. The room was very quiet." "Thank you, Mr. Carter," Robert said finally. "That's all for now." Daniel nodded. He turned toward the door. "One more thing," Robert said. Daniel stopped. "That brake system report you filed 2 months ago. The one about the Series 7 fleet." Daniel turned back. "Yes, sir. My operations team flagged it last week. Said you'd identified a fault pattern they hadn't caught." "I filed 3 reports," Daniel said. "The 3rd one had the full analysis." "I know. I read it last night." Robert was watching him carefully. "You've been filing reports like that for how long?" 4 years, Daniel said. "Give or take." "And who's been reading them?" Daniel held the man's gaze for exactly 3 seconds. "Until last night," he said. He left the answer hanging there, in the pale wood hush of the 40th floor, and walked to the elevator. He was back in the maintenance bay by 10:15. Marcus was waiting. "Well, it was fine," Daniel said. "That's it? Fine?" He asked me about Thursday night. Daniel picked up the brake caliper again. "And about some reports I filed." "Which reports?" "The Series 7 analysis." Marcus stared at him. "Danny, that analysis has been sitting in the system for 2 months. I know. If they'd caught that earlier, we wouldn't have had to pull the Rockford fleet." "I know," Daniel said again. "So you're telling me the CEO of Bennett Global called you to the 40th floor to talk about a woman you helped and a report you wrote?" "That's about right." Marcus shook his head slowly. "And you're just going to stand there and..." "I've got a brake line to finish," Daniel said. "You want to hand me that wrench?" Marcus handed him the wrench. Daniel got back to work. Outside, the November rain was still falling, and somewhere, in the Bennett Global Tower, Robert Bennett was sitting at his desk, reading Daniel Carter's maintenance reports, all 4 years of them, with an expression on his face that his assistant, who had worked for him for 16 years, had never seen before. It took her a moment to identify it. It was the expression of a man who had just realized he'd been looking in all the wrong places. The talk started on a Monday. Daniel didn't know about it until Tuesday afternoon when a guy named Pete Garza, a tire tech who worked the second bay and had never once in 11 years said anything that wasn't worth saying, walked past Daniel's station, glanced left and right like he was checking for traffic, and said quietly, "People are talking, man. Just so you know." Daniel kept his eyes on the transmission fluid pan he was draining. "About what?" "About you, about Bennett's daughter." Pete didn't stop walking. He said it in one breath, like he was dropping a package he didn't want to be caught holding. "Victor Hayes has been in the admin building since 8 this morning." Daniel looked up then, but Pete was already gone, disappearing around the corner of the bay with his clipboard, and Daniel was left standing there with a shop rag in one hand, and the specific cold feeling of a man who has done nothing wrong and is beginning to understand that it doesn't matter. Victor Hayes. Daniel had heard the name, but never had occasion to think much about it. Senior VP of Strategic Development, which was one of those titles that meant everything and nothing depending on who was using it. Victor was the kind of man who appeared in the company newsletter 4 times a year, always photographed at the right angle with the right people, always with a quote that sounded important and said exactly nothing. He was 45, handsome in an assembled way, and had been in the Joliet management structure for 3 years, without ever once walking through the maintenance bays. And he'd been in the admin building since 8 that morning, talking to someone. Daniel set the shop rag down and picked it back up again. He had a job to finish. He finished it. But the cold feeling stayed with him all day. By Wednesday morning, he understood what Victor had been doing. He understood it because Marcus pulled him into the supervisor's office at Sutton's before the rest of the shift had even clocked in, and closed the door with the careful quiet of someone who didn't want to be overheard. "You need to tell me what really happened Thursday night," Marcus said. Daniel looked at him. Marcus was 53 years old, a former Army mechanic who had worked at Bennett Global for 20 years and ran the Joliet maintenance department with the kind of no-nonsense efficiency that made everything feel slightly less chaotic. Daniel trusted him the way you trust the guy who has never once lied to you about anything, even when the truth was inconvenient. "I told you what happened," Daniel said. "Tell me again." Danny. Marcus sat down, which was unusual. Marcus almost never sat during conversations. He was a standing-up kind of man. The fact that he sat down now told Daniel something about the weight of what he was carrying. "There's a story going around about the camera footage from McGinty's." Daniel went still. "There's footage from the parking lot camera. Somebody pulled it. Somebody with the resources to pull it, which means it wasn't some random bartender who got curious." Marcus put both hands flat on his desk. "The clip is about 40 seconds long. It shows you helping a woman to your truck. It shows you driving away. That's all it shows? That's all it shows. There's no timestamp context, no audio, nothing that explains what came before." Marcus looked at him directly. "Victor Hayes has been sharing it." The cold feeling moved from Daniel's chest to somewhere lower and more fundamental. "Sharing it where?" "With the HR director. With 2 of the department heads," Marcus paused. "And with Robert Bennett, apparently. Though from what I understand, Robert's reaction was not exactly what Victor was hoping for." "What was he hoping for?" Marcus looked at him. "What do you think he was hoping for, Danny?" Daniel thought about it. He thought about Victor Hayes, whose name kept appearing in the same sentences as Olivia Bennett's name. And he thought about what a 40-second video clip of a man helping a woman into a truck could look like without the 45 minutes that preceded it. "He wanted me gone," Daniel said. "He wants more than that." Marcus leaned forward. "He's framing it as a pattern. He had someone pull your work history, your performance reviews, your personnel file. He's building something." Building what? I haven't done anything. I know that, Marcus said. But here's the thing, Danny, and I need you to hear me clearly. In this company, in this political moment, with the CEO's daughter involved, it doesn't matter what you did or didn't do. It matters what the story sounds like. And, right now, Victor Hayes is the one telling the story. Daniel sat with that for a moment. Then he said, "What does the story sound like?" Marcus looked at the door, then back at Daniel. "It sounds like a maintenance worker, no college degree, no connections. A dead wife and a kid saw an opportunity. Wealthy woman, alone, compromised, he picked her up, took her to his house, and now he's using that proximity to what? Get a promotion? Get a settlement? Get something." He shook his head. Victor's not saying it in those words. He's more careful than that. But that's the shape of it. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. "Does Robert Bennett believe that?" he asked. "I don't know what Robert Bennett believes," Marcus said. "But Victor Hayes has been with this company for 3 years. He sits on the executive committee. He's been positioning himself to marry into the Bennett family for at least 2 of those 3 years, that's an open secret if you're paying attention. And you—" Marcus spread his hands. "You're a maintenance tech from Joliet who filed break that nobody read. That's the contest." Daniel stared at the wall. "What do I do?" he said. Not asking for orders. Just thinking out loud, the way men do when they're trying to find solid ground. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "But I know you can't fight Victor Hayes from down here. You don't have the tools for it." Daniel nodded slowly. He picked up his jacket. "I'm going to go to work," he said. "Danny, I have a transmission to finish on the 47 truck. Lily has a parent-teacher conference on Thursday, Mrs. Petrova needs a ride to her doctor's appointment Friday morning." He put his jacket on. "My life doesn't stop because Victor Hayes decided I'm a problem." Marcus looked at him for a moment. "No," he said quietly. "I guess it doesn't." Daniel went back to the bay. He worked through the morning with his hands and tried not to let his mind go to the 45 minutes be 5 minutes in a bar on Route 30, because there was nothing in those 45 minutes that he would change, and therefore nothing useful in examining them. He had done what he'd done. He couldn't undo it, and he wouldn't if he could. That thought was the only solid thing available to him, so he held on to it. At 11:17, his phone buzzed. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He almost didn't answer it. "Daniel Carter," he said. A pause, then a voice he recognized. "It's Olivia." He said nothing for a moment. Just stood in the bay with a phone pressed to his ear, and the sound of air wrenches going somewhere behind him. "I know about the video," she said. "I know what Victor is doing." "Okay," he said. "I want you to know that I've talked to my father. I told him exactly what happened." "All right, Daniel." A longer pause. Her voice dropped slightly, the way it did when she was saying something that cost her something. I'm sorry this is happening because of me." He thought about what to say. He thought about the easy things. "It's fine. Don't worry about it. It's not your fault." He thought about how none of those things were quite true, or quite false. "Did you ask for help that night?" he said. "What?" "In the bar. Did you ask me for help?" "No, but then this isn't because of you. This is because of Victor Hayes." He shifted his weight. "And I can handle Victor Hayes." Another pause. "Can you?" He thought about Marcus's words. "You don't have the tools for it." "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I'm going to find out." She was quiet for a moment. "Then I'm going to the executive floor this afternoon. There's a leadership meeting." "Olivia," he said carefully, "you don't owe me anything. I know that." Her voice had a quality in it, now that he hadn't heard in the bar or on his couch or in his kitchen, something sharper, more decided. "That's not why I'm going." The line went quiet. He went back to work. Victor Hayes called his meeting at 2 o'clock that afternoon. Daniel only found out about it later, from Pete Garza, who had an inexplicable gift for knowing things that happened on floors he had no access to. The meeting was in Conference Room B, on the executive floor. 7 people, including the HR director, 2 department heads, and the company's head of legal compliance, whose name was Gerald Finch and who was, according to Pete, the kind of man who had never made a decision in his professional life that wasn't first run through 17 filters of institutional risk assessment. Victor had brought the video clip. He had brought Daniel's personnel file. He had brought a printed timeline that Pete couldn't describe in detail, but which evidently included Daniel's work history. His financial record as far as Victor had been able to obtain it, and what Pete described as a very clear implication that Daniel Carter had acted with premeditation. "He made it sound like you'd been planning this," Pete said, in the quiet behind the B-Bay storage rack where he'd pulled Daniel for this debrief. "Like you knew who she was. Like the whole thing was a setup." Daniel looked at him. "I didn't know who she was. I know that. But you're not in the room, Danny. The only person in the room talking about you is Victor, and Victor doesn't make the case for the other side." What was the room's reaction? Pete scratched the back of his neck. Mixed. Gerald Finch kept saying things like, "The optics are problematic, and we need to be cautious about precedent." The HR director was nodding a lot, which apparently she does when she's uncomfortable, and doesn't have enough information to have an opinion. One of the department heads, Kim Okafor, the one who runs regional compliance, kept asking Victor direct questions that he wasn't answering directly. Like what? Like, did Daniel know Olivia before that night? Like, what is the actual allegation? Like, what outcome is Victor proposing? Pete looked at him steadily. Victor kept pivoting, kept going back to the video, kept using the phrase potential liability. Daniel absorbed this. "And then?" he said. Pete's expression changed, and then Olivia Bennett walked in. The maintenance bay was loud air tools, engine noise. The radio someone always kept at a volume, designed to be heard over the machinery. But in the small space behind the storage rack, Daniel heard every word. "She just walked in," he said. "Apparently she has standing to attend any management meeting she wants. She's technically an executive consultant to the board, has been for 3 years. Victor forgot about that, or didn't think she'd show up, or..." Pete shook his head. "She walked in and sat down. Victor tried to redirect, tried to frame it as a personnel matter she didn't need to be involved in. And she looked at him and said..." Pete stopped. "What did she say?" She said, "Victor, you put a 40-second video in front of 7 people and called it evidence. I was in that bar for 2 hours before Daniel Carter walked in. If you'd like me to tell this room what the other 1 hour and 59 minutes looked like, I'm happy to do that." Daniel was very still, and he said, "And Victor said the meeting was about process and liability, not about the specific events. And then?" Pete looked almost impressed. "And then she pulled out a printed statement. 4 pages. She read it out loud. The whole thing. Everything that happened, from the moment she walked into McGinty's until the moment she left Daniel's house the next morning. She read it out loud," Daniel said. "Word for word. Including," Pete hesitated, "including the note you left her." The shop rag in Daniel's hand. He hadn't realized he was holding it until now. "She read the note?" he said. "She read the note." Pete's voice had shifted into something quieter, the way voices do when a story moves from interesting to significant. Tylenol on the table. Coffee in the pot. Take what you need, he paused. Gerald Finch stopped nodding. Kim Okafor asked no more questions. The HR director apparently started writing something on her notepad and didn't look up for about 30 seconds. "Victor?" Pete was quiet for a moment. Victor said, "This doesn't change the optics of the situation." And Olivia put the statement down and looked at him and said, "Victor, the situation is that a man who works for this company saw a woman alone on the floor of a bar, and he helped her. That's the situation. What exactly are the optics you're concerned about?" Daniel turned and looked at the truck in Bay 4 that was waiting for him. Bay 4, Truck 47, transmission issue, probably a solenoid pack. And then he said, "That's all I got," Pete said. "Meeting's still technically in progress, I think. Or it was 20 minutes ago." Daniel nodded. He put the shop rag down. He picked up his wrench. "Go back to work, Pete," he said. "Don't you want to know? When there's something to know, someone will tell me." He looked at Pete. "Thank you, seriously. But I need to finish this transmission." Pete looked at him for a long moment, with an expression that Daniel couldn't quite categorize, something between respect and the specific bafflement of a man watching another man be calmer than the situation calls for. Then he went back to work, and Daniel went back to Bay 4. He worked on the transmission for the next 90 minutes, with total concentration, which was not as hard as it might have sounded. There was something about mechanical systems that Daniel had always found clarifying. They were logical. If something was wrong, there was a reason. If you followed the reason carefully enough, you found the source. You fixed the source. The thing worked. People were not like that. People were not logical in the way transmissions were logical. People had Victor Hayeses in them, and complicated fathers and daughters who carried notes in the pockets of silk dresses. But the transmission was logical. And so he fixed the transmission. At 4:43, Marcus appeared at the entrance to Bay 4. Daniel saw him in his peripheral vision, but kept working. "You can stop," Marcus said. "Almost done, Danny." Marcus's voice was different from the morning. Not careful, not measured, something else. "Stop for a second." Daniel set the wrench down and turned. Marcus was standing in the bay entrance with his hands in his jacket pockets and an expression that Daniel could not immediately read. But Marcus's eyes were doing something unusual. They were very bright. "The meeting ended 40 minutes ago," Marcus said. Daniel waited. Gerald Finch recommended that the matter be considered closed, pending no further incidents. The HR director agreed. Marcus took his hands out of his pockets. Victor Hayes left the building at 4:15. He hasn't come back. Daniel kept waiting. "Robert Bennett called me at 4:30, Marcus said. "Personally. Which in 11 years has happened exactly once, and that was during the Rockford incident." He stopped, then continued, more carefully. He said, and I'm quoting because I wrote it down, "I'd like you to tell Daniel Carter that his Series 7 safety analysis has been reviewed by our engineering team, and that we'd like to have a longer conversation with him at his convenience." The bay was noisy. Someone was running a drill press. The radio had moved on to a country station. Daniel stood in all of it and heard Marcus's words and felt something move in his chest that he was not going to name out loud. "At his convenience," he repeated. "That's what he said." Daniel looked back at the truck. Transmission, Bay 4, Truck 47. One more bolt on the solenoid pack, and the job was done. "Tell him Thursday morning works," Daniel said. "After I drop Lily at school." Marcus stared at him. "Thursday morning," he repeated. "After drop-off. Probably 8:15, 8:30. "Danny," Marcus said. "The CEO of the company just called to request a meeting with you, and you're scheduling it around school drop-off." "Lily has a thing about being walked in," Daniel said. "She doesn't need me to go to the classroom or anything. Just to the front door." He picked up his wrench. 8:30 should be fine. Marcus stood there for another 3 seconds. Then he laughed. It was a genuine laugh, the kind that arrives uninvited and cannot be reabsorbed. It filled the bay and surprised them both. 8:30, Marcus said. "I'll tell him." He walked away. Daniel put the last bolt on the solenoid pack and tested the assembly because he had done it carefully and for reasons, which was the only way he knew how to do anything. He cleaned up his station. He filed his end-of-day report. He clocked out at 5:02. He picked up Lily at Mrs. Petrova's at 5:20. She had a drawing to show him, not a horse this time, but a picture of a woman with dark hair sitting on a couch, with a blanket around her shoulders and a mug in her hands, and next to her, a smaller figure with braids. "That's me and the lady," Lily said. "I'm giving her ginger ale." "She had coffee," Daniel said. "In my picture she has ginger ale," Lily said, with the absolute certainty of an artist who will not be corrected on matters of creative vision. Daniel looked at the drawing for a moment. The woman on the couch didn't look like she was lost or drunk or alone. She looked, in Lily's 8-year-old rendering, like someone who had arrived somewhere. Like someone who had finally found the right room. "Can I keep this?" he asked. Lily looked at him, like this was a strange question. "Obviously," she said. "I made it for you." He folded it carefully and put it in his shirt pocket. They drove home through the early dark of a November evening, Lily talking about her day in the disconnected, high-velocity way of children who have been saving things up, and Daniel listening with the part of his attention that was always available for her, regardless of what the rest of him was carrying, and the part of him that was still in the maintenance bay, still holding the shop rag, still hearing Pete's voice say she read the note, word for word. That part of him was doing something that it hadn't done in a very long time. It was beginning very carefully to hope, not for anything dramatic, not for promotions or vindication or the kind of resolution that exists in movies where everything becomes clear and right and properly rewarded. Just hope, the quiet kind, The kind that looks like a folded piece of paper in a shirt pocket. The kind that sounds like a child explaining why she put ginger ale in the drawing instead of coffee. The kind that doesn't announce itself, doesn't require an audience, just holds on in the dark all the way home. But Daniel had been around long enough around grief, around loss, around the particular education of life in his particular corner of it, to know that hope in the evening is not the same as safety in the morning, and that whatever Robert Bennett wanted to say on Thursday was still unknown, and that Victor Hayes had left the building at 4:15 but had not, presumably, disappeared from the earth, and that whatever Olivia Bennett had done in that conference room this afternoon, reading 4 pages out loud, word for word, including a note about Tylenol and coffee that wasn't act that had consequences. For her, for the way her father looked at her, for the way Victor Hayes would now look at her, for all of them. He pulled into the driveway on Millbrook Lane. Lily had fallen asleep in the last 5 minutes of the drive, the way she sometimes did one moment narrating the injustices of the third-grade cafeteria seating arrangement, the next moment gone, her head tilted against the window. Daniel sat in the parked truck for a moment and looked at her. 8 years old, braids coming undone, a drawing of a stranger and herself, sitting on a couch, connected by something his daughter had identified, but hadn't named, because she was 8 and didn't need to name it. It was enough. He got out of the truck. He went around to the passenger side. He opened the door carefully and lifted his daughter without waking her, the way he had been doing since she was a baby, since before the world had decided to make things complicated. She was heavier than she used to be. She was always heavier than he remembered. He carried her inside. He put her to bed. He went to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a long moment without turning on the light. Then he reached into his shirt pocket and took out Lily's drawing. He unfolded it. He looked at it in the dark. 2 figures on a couch. One with dark hair and a mug, one with braids. He folded it back up. He put it on the refrigerator with a magnet, next to the drawing of his truck with the arrow labeled Boz Truck, and the horse drawings, and the school calendar, and the grocery list that said milk, eggs, bread, and the peanut butter Lily likes not the other kind. He stood back and looked at the refrigerator. Then he went to bed. 3 miles away, in her apartment in Lincoln Park, clean and spare and carefully arranged. A place that looked exactly like what she wanted people to think. Her life looked like Olivia Bennett sat on her own couch, with her knees pulled up and a glass of water on the table in front of her. Not drinking it, just looking at it. Her phone had 17 new messages. She wasn't reading them. Victor would have messages of his own to send. Her father would have thoughts he hadn't yet delivered. Her publicist would want to know if there was anything to manage. Her assistant would want to know what tomorrow looked like. She wasn't reading any of it. She was thinking about a conference room on the 40th floor and the expression on 7 faces as she read 4 pages out loud, her voice even and clear. Each word chosen because it was the true one and not because it was the comfortable one. She was thinking about Victor Hayes saying, "This doesn't change the optics," and the way Kim Okafor had looked at him after that, the particular look of a person who has just decided something. She was thinking about 4 pages and a note. Tylenol on the table. Coffee in the pot. Take what you need. Nobody had ever written her a note like that. Nobody in her 31 years on this earth, with her father's money and her family's name, and the procession of people who wanted proximity to both. Nobody had ever said, "Here is what you need. It's already there. Take it." She picked up her phone. She opened a new message, typed a number she had memorized from the Bennett Global Employee Directory that her father's assistant had emailed her that morning. She typed, "The meeting is over. You still have your job. You're welcome." She looked at it. She deleted it. She typed, "Thank you for the coffee this morning." She looked at that for a longer time. Then she sent it. She put her phone face down on the cushion beside her. She waited. Across the city, in a dark kitchen in Joliet, a phone lit up on the counter where Daniel had left it. He was already asleep. The message waited there, in the dark, unread, glowing faintly against the countertop. Patient, the way good things learn to be patient. In a house full of horse drawings and grocery lists, and the specific quiet of a man who had done the right thing and gone to bed without waiting for credit. The refrigerator hummed. The message waited. Outside, very gently, it began to snow. He saw the message at 6:14 in the morning. He was standing in the kitchen in socks, waiting for the coffee to finish, when he picked up his phone from the counter, and the screen lit up with Olivia's text. "Thank you for the coffee this morning." Sent at 11:47 the night before. He looked at it for a moment. "The way you look at something that doesn't quite fit the category you've been keeping it in," he typed back. "You're welcome. How's your head?" Not a question mark. Just a statement shaped like one. Her response came 11 seconds later, which meant she was already awake, which meant she hadn't slept as well as he had. "Better than it deserves to be. You have a meeting this morning." He looked at that. "I know. My father is not as difficult as he seems." Daniel thought about Robert Bennett standing at the edge of his desk, looking at the lake, saying she sounded like she'd slept. He typed, "I think he's exactly as difficult as he seems. I think that's not the same as being wrong." A pause. Longer this time. "Then that's a very precise thing to say about a man you've met once. I've worked for him for 11 years, he typed. I just hadn't been in the same room as him before." Another pause. Then, and he could hear something in it, even through a text message. Something that might have been a laugh. "Fair enough. Good luck." He put the phone down. He finished making coffee. He made Lily's lunch peanut butter, the kind she liked, not the other kind, and set out her cereal and her juice box, and went to wake her up with the same process he's used every morning, which involved 3 increasingly less gentle interventions and a final negotiation over whether she could wear the purple shirt 2 days in a row. She could not. She wore it anyway. He decided that was a battle for another day. At 7:50, he walked her to the front door of Clement Elementary, the way she preferred, not to the classroom, just to the door. She pushed through without looking back, the way she always did, because she was 8, and the world inside that door was entirely hers, and he had no jurisdiction over it. He watched the door close behind her. Then he got back in the truck and drove toward Chicago. He arrived at the Bennett Global Tower at 8:22. The same woman in the blazer, Christine, met him in the lobby. She was more formal this time. Or maybe he was more aware of the formality, because he'd had a day and a half to think about what it meant. She brought him to the 40th floor. She brought him to Robert Bennett's office. She knocked twice and opened the door without waiting for a response, which told Daniel something about how this office operated. Robert was sitting this time, behind the desk, not on the edge of it. There was someone else in the room. Olivia was there, in the chair to the left of the desk, with a notepad on her knee and a pen in her hand. She looked at Daniel when he walked in with an expression that was careful and steady, and gave nothing away. He looked back at her the same way. "Mr. Carter," Robert said. "Sit down." This time Daniel sat. Robert looked at him for a moment. Then he opened a folder on his desk and pushed it across the surface toward Daniel. "Do you know what this is?" Daniel looked at it without picking it up. It was a printed report, his formatting, his section headers. "That's my Series 7 analysis," he said. "The third version. Filed October 14th. And this?" Robert slid a second document alongside it. Daniel looked at it. "That's the first version. Filed August 22nd. And this? A third, September 9th, the second version. I added the fleet mileage correlation data." Robert looked at him. "You filed 3 separate reports on the same issue. The first 2 didn't get a response," Daniel said. "I assumed they weren't being read. The third one included a projected failure timeline, which I thought might get more attention." "It did," Robert said. 8 weeks after you filed it." Daniel said nothing. "Our engineering team reviewed your analysis Monday night," Robert continued. "They say the fault pattern you identified in the Series 7, brake actuator housing, would have produced a catastrophic failure in approximately 4 to 7 trucks within the next 90 days, based on the mileage data." He paused. "We run a fleet of 61 Series 7s across 4 regional hubs." Daniel kept his face still. "The Rockford hub alone runs 18 of them," Olivia said quietly, from her chair. 18 trucks, most of them running the Interstate 90 corridor. Daniel thought about Interstate 90. He thought about the kind of failure a brake actuator produces at highway speed, in a 40-ton freight vehicle on a 6-lane corridor. "You saved lives," Robert said, flatly, without theater, the way a man who runs a logistics company talks about the actuarial weight of things. I want you to understand that. Your reports, all three of them, saved lives. And for 8 weeks nobody read them. The room was very quiet. I know, Daniel said. Robert looked at him sharply. You know, I know nobody read them. That's why I filed 3. And you just kept coming to work. It's my job, Daniel said. Filing the report is my job. Making sure someone reads it, that's yours. Olivia's pen stopped moving on her notepad. Robert Bennett looked at Daniel Carter across that desk for a long moment with an expression that was doing several things at once: processing, recalibrating, something that might have been the early stages of shame. If Robert Bennett was a man capable of that in front of witnesses, which Daniel was not yet certain of. You're right, Robert said. That surprised Daniel. Not the words, the speed of them. Yes, sir, Daniel said. I'm going to ask you something, Robert said, and I want an honest answer, not the answer you think I want. All right. In 11 years with this company, how many times has something you reported been ignored? Daniel thought about it honestly. The Series 7 was the most significant, he said. There were 2 others that were eventually addressed. One that wasn't, as far as I know. Which one wasn't? The South Bay ventilation at the Joliet hub. I reported elevated carbon monoxide readings 3 times over 18 months. Nothing was done. I bought a personal CO monitor and put it in the bay myself. He paused. I'm still using it. Robert did not move. You bought your own equipment, he said, because the company didn't respond to your safety report. It was $62, Daniel said. I wasn't going to wait. Robert closed his eyes briefly. He opened them. He looked at Olivia, who was looking at Daniel with an expression that was not easy to categorize. Christine, Robert said, raising his voice slightly. The door opened. Christine appeared. Get me Gerald Finch, Robert said, and the Joliet Facilities Director, in this office. Today, Christine disappeared. Robert looked back at Daniel. That ventilation issue will be resolved this week. In writing to you by Friday, Daniel nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me, Robert said. I should have read your reports 8 weeks ago. I should have read them 18 months ago. He leaned back in his chair. The leather made a sound like a decision being made. I want to talk to you about your role at this company. And here it was. Daniel had known it was coming, had felt it building since Thursday night, since the parking lot of McGinty's, since the elevator ride down from this floor 2 days ago. He'd known it was coming and had told himself he didn't know what it meant, which was a small lie he'd been telling himself for self-protection. All right, he said. I'm creating a new position, Robert said. Director of Operational Safety. It would oversee maintenance safety protocols across all 4 regional hubs. It would report directly to my COO, with access to present to the Executive Committee quarterly. He paused. I want you in it. The room waited. Daniel looked at the folder on the desk. He looked at the 3 reports. He looked at 11 years of coming to work and doing the job and filing the reports and buying the CO monitor with $62 out of his own pocket because nobody was going to do it, and someone had to. What does the position pay? He asked. Robert told him. It was more than 3 times his current salary. Daniel's face did not change. Olivia watched him carefully. I'd need to understand the authority structure, Daniel said. If I identify a safety issue, what's the escalation path? How many layers does a report go through before it reaches someone who can act on it? Robert looked at him. You'd have direct authority to halt operations pending review. Including executive fleet operations? Including executive fleet operations. And if I recommend a halt and someone above me overrides it, it goes to me, Robert said, personally. Daniel was quiet for a moment. What happened with Victor Hayes, he said. The question arrived without preamble, which was how Daniel Carter asked questions when he actually wanted the answer. Olivia's pen went still again. Robert's face shifted slightly, not much, but enough. Victor tendered his resignation yesterday afternoon, he said. Effective immediately. Did you ask for it? I made it clear it would be in his interest. Because of what he did to me, Daniel said. Because of what he did to my daughter, Robert said quietly. And because of what he did to you. And because he stopped. And something moved across his face that was private and had been building for longer than this week. Because a man who will build a case against a maintenance worker for helping a woman in a parking lot using 40 seconds of video he had no right to pull is not a man I want in this building. Daniel nodded. I have one more question, he said. Go ahead. Does this job have anything to do with Thursday night? Robert looked at him directly. No, he said. The job exists because I read your reports. And I talked to my engineering team. And I've spent 48 hours understanding that I've had a man in my company for 11 years who has been preventing catastrophic failures with equipment he bought himself, and I've been paying him $54,000 a year. He spread his hands. Thursday night is the reason I know your name. Your work is the reason you're sitting in that chair. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. Okay, he said. Okay, you'll take it? Okay, I'll think about it, Daniel said. I'd like to see the full position description and the authority structure in writing. And I need to know what the transition looks like for my current team. Marcus has been running that bay for 20 years. Whatever I do, his position doesn't get touched. Robert blinked. Then, almost imperceptibly, something in his posture shifted, a settling, like a building finding its foundation. Agreed, he said. Then I'll give you an answer by end of week. Robert extended his hand across the desk. Daniel shook it. He stood, collected his jacket, and turned toward the door. He was nearly there when Olivia said quietly, Daniel. He turned. She was still in her chair, notepad on her knee, pen in hand. She looked at him with the same dark eyes that had been unfocused in the bar on Thursday night, that had been measuring him on the couch Friday morning, that had been reading 4 pages out loud in a conference room on Tuesday afternoon. Marcus's bay, she said, the ventilation. Is it bad? It's not dangerous right now, Daniel said. The monitor alerts if it gets above threshold. But winter's coming. They'll be running the heating units more. It'll get worse. She wrote something on her notepad. He nodded and walked out. In the elevator going down, he stood alone and looked at his reflection in the brushed steel door and thought about $54,000. Becoming something else. Something with 3 times the digits. And he thought about what that meant for Lily, and for the credit card balance, and for the savings account that had enough for 3 months of emergencies. And then he thought, I need to finish the truck in Bay 4. I told Marcus I'd have it done by noon. The elevator opened. He walked to the parking garage. He drove back to Joliet. He finished the truck in Bay 4 by 11:47. Marcus watched him work for the last 20 minutes without asking anything, which was how Marcus communicated respect for a man's need to process something in his own time and with a wrench in his hand. At noon, Marcus handed him a lunch truck and said, Well, they want to give me a director job, Daniel said. Marcus put his own sandwich down. Define director job, he said. Daniel told him. The title, the scope, the salary, the authority structure. Marcus's expression moved through several phases: surprise, then something that looked briefly like pride, then a more complicated thing that Daniel recognized as the feeling of watching someone you've been in the trenches with for years get handed a ladder. Your spot in this bay, Daniel said. Nothing changes. I made that clear before I agreed to anything. You didn't agree to anything, Marcus said. I didn't, but I made it a condition before I'd consider it. Marcus looked at him for a long time. Danny, he said, you know you don't have to protect me. I'm not protecting you, Daniel said. You're a good supervisor and this bay needs you. That's not loyalty, it's logistics. Marcus picked his sandwich back up. He looked at it. He put it back down. Take the job, he said. I haven't decided yet. Take the job, Marcus said again. And not because you've earned it, though you have. Take it, because if you don't, some guy who doesn't know what a CO monitor does will get it. And in 18 months, there'll be another report sitting unread in the system. He looked at Daniel steadily. Take it, because you're the right person for it. Daniel finished his sandwich. I'll let you know by Friday, he said. He clocked out at 5:03. He picked up Lily at 5:22. She had a spelling test to show him 18 out of 20, with necessary and Wednesday marked wrong. Though she informed him with some heat that the spelling of Wednesday was objectively the English language's fault and not hers. He agreed. She seemed satisfied. They stopped at the grocery store for milk and the peanut butter she liked and a box of the cereal with the marshmallows that he normally held the line on, but that he put in the cart tonight without comment, which made her narrow her eyes at him. What happened today? She said. What makes you think something happened? Because you got the marshmallow cereal without me asking. He looked at her. 8 years old with Susan's eyes, in the cereal aisle of the Jewel Osco on Route 30. I had a meeting, he said. About what? About work. Good work or bad work? He put the cereal in the cart. Good work, he said, I think. She considered this. Is that why you look like that? Like what? Like you don't know what face to make. He looked at his daughter. He thought about the expression on Robert Bennett's face when Daniel said, "That's yours, not angry." Just receiving it, the way a man receives information he's needed for a while and wasn't ready for. He thought about Olivia writing something on her notepad when he mentioned the ventilation getting worse in winter. He thought about Marcus saying, "Take it, because you're the right person for it." Yeah, he said, that's why. Lily reached up and put her hand in his. They walked to the next aisle. That night, after Lily was asleep, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and wrote out the things he knew for certain. This was something Susan had taught him in the early years of their marriage, when he'd go quiet for days with a decision he couldn't make. Write down what you know, she'd said, not what you think. What you know. He wrote, Lily needs stability.
He wrote, the CO monitor costs $62.
He wrote, Marcus said, take it. He wrote, 4 to 7 trucks. Interstate 90 corridor. He wrote, 61 Series 7s. He wrote, 3 reports, 8 weeks. He wrote, the right person for it. He looked at the list. Then he wrote one more thing at the bottom. He wrote, Susan would say stop thinking and do the thing that helps the most people. He put the pen down. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed. At 6:49 the next morning, he sent Robert Bennett an email through the employee portal. Because he didn't have Robert Bennett's personal email and wasn't going to ask for it. The email said, Mr. Bennett, I've reviewed the position and the conditions we discussed. I'll accept pending written confirmation of the authority structure and the terms regarding the Joliet maintenance team. I'm available to discuss timeline whenever is convenient for you. Daniel Carter, Maintenance Tech, Joliet Hub. He titled it Director of Operational Safety. He sent it and got Lily's cereal ready and didn't look at his phone again for 40 minutes. Across the city, Robert Bennett's assistant forwarded him the email at 7:03 with a note that said, this came through the employee portal. Maintenance Tech from Joliet. Robert read it twice. He forwarded it to his CO with a single line, start the paperwork. Then he forwarded it to Olivia. She was in a coffee shop in Lincoln Park when it came through, with a cup she hadn't touched and a contract she'd been reviewing for an hour without actually reading it. She looked at the email. She read it twice. She set her phone down and picked up her coffee and finally drank it. It was cold. She didn't care. 3 days later, on a Friday afternoon, Daniel Carter was in the Joliet HR office signing papers when his phone buzzed. Not a call, a text. Unknown number, but not unknown. He knew the area code by now. Congratulations, Director. He looked at it. He typed back, it's not official until Monday. It's official. Dad signed the paperwork this morning. It goes to the board next week for ratification, but that's a formality. A pause. Then you're going to be good at this. He looked at the text. He typed, how's your head? Same as the first time. Not a question mark. Why do you keep asking me that? Because the first time I met you, you had a bad night. I want to know if you're having better ones. A long pause this time. Longer than the 11 seconds of that first morning. He finished signing the HR paperwork, shook the HR coordinator's hand, collected his copies. He was in the elevator going down when the response came through. Yes, she wrote. Better ones. And then, a beat later, because of a lot of things. Some of them, I'm still figuring out. He stepped out of the elevator into the lobby. He typed, that's enough for now. He drove home. He picked up Lily. He told her he had a new job. She asked if he would still fix trucks. Different trucks, he said. Different problems. She thought about it. Can I still tell people my dad fixes trucks? You can tell people whatever you want. She decided she would tell people her dad fixed trucks. The specific technicalities were, in her view, beside the point. That night she drew him a new picture. Not a horse, not a truck, not a woman on a couch. Just a man, stick-figured but carefully detailed plaid shirt, boots, something in his hand that might have been a wrench or a pen. She hadn't decided. Above it she wrote, in the careful letters of a child who had just gotten necessary wrong on a spelling test, Boff fixes things. He put it on the refrigerator. He stood back and looked at it next to the others. The truck, the horses, the woman with the blanket, and the mug of ginger ale that had actually been coffee. Then he went to check his email. Gerald Finch had sent the written confirmation about the South Bay ventilation. Resolution scheduled for Tuesday. Equipment ordered. Contractor confirmed. He read it twice. He responded, "Thank you. Please copy me on the installation report." He closed the laptop. He sat in the kitchen in the quiet of a Friday night in a house that was small and had a soft spot in the linoleum by the sink, with a refrigerator covered in drawings and a coffee pot that held exactly 4 cups and a savings account that was about to start growing in a way he hadn't dared to plan for. He thought about the man Victor Hayes had described in that conference room. Opportunistic, calculated, a maintenance worker who saw a chance and took it. A man who had looked at a wealthy woman, alone and vulnerable, and understood how to use that. He thought about the $62 cylinder still clipped to the shelf in Bay 4. He thought about the note he'd left on the coffee table. Not because anyone was going to read it. Not because he thought it would matter. Just because someone was going to wake up in an unfamiliar place, and they deserved to know where the Tylenol was. He thought about Pete Garza, saying she read the note, word for word, in a room full of people who needed to understand what kind man they were actually talking about. He thought about Robert Bennett's face when Daniel said, "That's yours." Not angry, just receiving. He thought about Lily's hand in the cereal aisle, warm and matter-of-fact. The hand of a child who had never once doubted that her father was a good man and therefore had never required him to prove it. There was a version of this week that could have gone differently if Robert Bennett had believed Victor Hayes' story, if Olivia had stayed silent in her apartment instead of going to that conference room, if Pete had never pulled him behind the storage rack to tell him what was happening on floors he didn't have access to. There was a version where Daniel Carter's good deed became the thing that ended him, where a 40-second video clip and a man with resources and a motive became the whole story. He had been aware of that version all week. He had carried it alongside the wrench and the CO monitor and the sandwich in the Jewel Osco cereal aisle. But here was the thing about doing the right thing when nobody is watching. Sometimes nobody is watching because nobody needs to be. Sometimes the thing is its own witness. Sometimes the note is enough. He got up. He rinsed his mug. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed with the particular quiet of a man who knows that tomorrow is going to be different from today, and that the day after is going to be different again, and that this is not something to be afraid of. Not anymore. Outside, the November snow had stopped sometime in the last few days, and the streets of Millbrook Lane were dry and cold and empty and very still, the way streets get late on a Friday night, when the week has been long and the people in the houses have run out of complicated things to hold on to and have put them down at last and gone to sleep. The refrigerator hummed. The drawings stayed where they were, and somewhere in the city, 3 miles of dark highway away, a woman in an apartment in Lincoln Park was sitting on her couch, not lost, not alone, not waiting for a driver who would cancel in the rain, reading a contract with full attention for the first time in weeks, a cup of coffee beside her that was actually warm because she had made it herself, for herself, in the apartment that was beginning slowly to feel like somewhere she actually lived. She paused once. She looked at the window. She thought about a kitchen in Joliet, small and plain, with a soft spot in the linoleum by the sink. She thought, I should have asked him how Lily liked the drawing. She picked up her phone. She put it down. She went back to the contract. She had things to build. So did he. Monday came the way significant Mondays always do, look exactly like every other Monday until it didn't. Daniel dropped Lily at the front door of Clement Elementary at 7:51, watched the door close behind her, and sat in the truck for exactly 30 seconds doing nothing. Then he drove to the Bennett Global Tower in Chicago, parked in the visitor structure because his new credentials hadn't been processed yet, and rode the elevator to the 40th floor in the same dark jeans and plaid flannel shirt we'd worn to every meeting up here, because he didn't own anything else and wasn't going to pretend otherwise. Christine met him with a badge. Temporary, she said. Permanent one would be ready Wednesday. The badge had his name on it. His photo, and under the photo, in clean sans serif font, Director, Operational Safety. He looked at it for a moment. He clipped it to his shirt and followed Christine down the hall. His office was not on the 40th floor. It was on the 22nd, which was where the operational divisions lived: compliance, fleet management, regional logistics, risk assessment. The office was a real one, with a door and a window, and a desk that was significantly less impressive than Robert Bennett's, but significantly more impressive than the overturned milk crate Daniel had been using as a side table in the maintenance bay for the past 3 years. There was a desktop computer, a phone with more buttons than he'd ever use, and a stack of files that someone had assembled and labeled in Christine's handwriting. Series 7 Fleet Status, Joliet Hub Ventilation, Regional Safety Audit Q3. CO Monitoring Protocol Pending. He stood in the doorway of the office. He thought, "This is going to take some getting used to." He sat down, opened the first file, and got to work. By 10:15 he had read through the Series 7 Fleet Status Report, made 4 pages of notes, identified 3 follow-up questions for the engineering team, and drafted an outline for a standardized cross-hub reporting protocol that he'd been mentally constructing for about 2 years, without anywhere to put it. At 10:20, someone knocked on his open door. He looked up. The man in the doorway was about 40, compact and precise, with the kind of steady eyes that belong to people who have spent serious time paying attention to serious things. He was wearing a Bennett Global badge that said Regional Safety Compliance, Marcus Webb. Not his Marcus, different last name, different hub. "I heard we finally got a director," the man said. "I'm Webb. I run compliance for the Southern region." "Daniel Carter," Daniel said. "Come in." Webb came in and sat down without ceremony. He looked at the files on the desk. He looked at Daniel's notepad. He said, "Is that a cross-hub reporting outline?" "Draft," Daniel said. "How long did that take you?" "About 40 minutes. Webb looked at him steadily. "I've been asking for something like that for 2 years. "So have I," Daniel said. "From the other direction." Webb leaned forward. "What other direction?" "The maintenance bay in Joliet." Webb was quiet for a moment. "You're the guy from the Series 7 reports," he said. "Yes, you filed 3 of them." "Yes, and nobody read them for 8 weeks. 7 weeks and 4 days, Daniel said. "But I stopped counting." Webb looked at him for another moment. Then he said, "I have a regional safety audit that's been sitting with the COO's office for 6 weeks. Flagged 2 issues. One of them involves load securing protocols on the Eastern Hub night shifts. The other involves driver fatigue reporting the system. Allows supervisors to override rest period flags." Daniel put his pen down. "Show me." Webb reached into the folder he was carrying and put a report on the desk. Daniel read it. He read it the way he read everything, completely, in order, without skipping. It took 9 minutes. Webb waited, which told Daniel that Webb was a man who understood the value of being read carefully. "The override issue," Daniel said. "How many times has it been used in the last quarter?" 47, Webb said. "Across 3 hubs. And in how many of those cases was the driver involved in an incident within 72 hours of the override?" Webb paused. "That's not something the current system tracks." "It should be," Daniel said. "Can you get me the raw data?" "I can get you whatever you need," Webb said. He was looking at Daniel the way Pete Garza had looked at him from behind the storage rack, like a man recalibrating his expectations in real time. "How fast do you work?" "Fast enough," Daniel said. "Send me the data today." Webb stood. He extended his hand. Daniel shook it. At the door, Webb turned back. "For what it's worth," he said, "everybody in this division knows how you got this job. The story's been around since last week." Daniel looked at him. "Does it matter?" he asked. "To some people," Webb said. "Not to me. To me, a man who files the same safety report 3 times until someone reads it is exactly the man I want running this department." He paused. "To the people it matters. They'll get over it. Or they won't. Either way, the driver fatigue data doesn't care." He left. Daniel went back to his notepad. By noon, he had drafted his first formal memo as Director of Operational Safety addressed the CSLOO, recommending immediate suspension of the supervisor override function in the fatigue reporting system pending review. He walked it to the COO's office himself, rather than sending it through the system. because he had learned from the Series 7 experience that some things need a human being attached to them to get read the same day. The COO, a woman named Sandra Park, who had been running Bennett Global's operations for 7 years, with the particular calm of someone who has seen every variety of crisis and classified them all as manageable, read the memo while he stood there. She looked up. "You're recommending we suspend a function that 60 supervisors are currently using. I'm recommending we suspend a function that's been used 47 times in 3 months, and that we have no data to assess for safety impact," Daniel said. "We can restore it once we've built in the incident correlation tracking." "How long will that take?" 2 weeks if the IT team is responsive. 3 if they're not. Sandra looked at him. "I'll call the IT director this afternoon. I'd also like a direct line to the regional hub's supervisors," Daniel said, "for safety flagging. Right now, reports go through 3 layers before they reach anyone with authority to act. I'd like to cut that to 1. Sandra put the memo down. She looked at him for a moment with the measuring expression of a person who is deciding whether the thing in front of her is an asset or a complication. "You've been here 4 hours," she said. "Yes, ma'am. And you've already changed a protocol and reorganized a reporting chain. Draft recommendations," he said. "Nothing's changed until you approve it." She almost smiled. "That's a very precise distinction. I learned it recently," he said, "from someone who runs a much larger desk than mine." She picked up the memo again. "I'll review it today. You'll have my response by end of business." He went back to his office. He ate the lunch he'd packed, same routine as always, because the routine was not going to change. Just because the floor number had and read Webb's fatigue data when it arrived at 1:15, and built a correlation model by 2:40 that showed a statistically significant relationship between supervisor overrides and incidents within the following 72 hours that was, in his careful professional assessment, not ambiguous. He sent it to Sandra with a note, revised recommendation attached. "Suspension of override function is urgent, not precautionary." Sandra's response came at 3:02 approved. "Suspension effective tomorrow morning. IT has been notified." He saved the email. He went back to the cross-hub reporting outline. At 4:30, his office phone rang, not his cell. The desk phone, which he hadn't used yet, and which rang with a sound he associated with a different era. He picked it up. "Carter," he said. "It's Robert," said the voice on the other end. Daniel straightened slightly in his chair. Not from deference, just from the instinct of a man who has learned to be precise when precision is called for. "Mr. Bennett, I heard you suspended the fatigue override system." "Sandra Park approved it," Daniel said. "It was her call." "She called me before she approved it," Robert said. "I told her to follow your recommendation." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know that. You didn't need to. That's how it's supposed to work." A pause. "How's the office?" "It's got a window," Daniel said. "Is that relevant?" "The Bay in Joliet didn't have one." "So, yeah, it's relevant. A beat." Something shifted in Robert's voice, not humor exactly, but something adjacent to it. The sound of a man allowing himself to be slightly less armored than usual. "Webb came to see me this afternoon," Robert said. "He's good," Daniel said. "The driver fatigue audit he ran is thorough. He's been trying to get someone to read it for 6 weeks. "I know," Robert said. "I read it tonight." A pause that had weight in it. "I'm detecting a pattern." "Yes, sir," Daniel said. "I'm hoping to interrupt it." A longer pause. "How's Lily?" Robert said. The question surprised Daniel. He showed it briefly, in the silence before he answered. "She's good. She's got a horse phase that's been going on for about 8 months. I'm starting to think it might be permanent." "My daughter had a horse phase," Robert said. "It was permanent. She has 2 of them in Barrington." Daniel didn't know what to do with that particular piece of information, so he filed it. "Get some rest, Carter," Robert said. "Tuesday's going to be busy." "Yes, sir." The line went quiet. Daniel sat at his desk for a moment after the call, holding the phone receiver, which was heavier than he remembered desk phones being. He put it down carefully. Then his cell buzzed. "Olivia, Dad called you, didn't he?" "Daniel. Olivia. He called me right after. First time he's called me about work in 3 years without it being a criticism." He read that twice. "Daniel, what did he say?" "Olivia," he said. And I'm quoting, "Your maintenance tech is going to give Sandra Park gray hair." "Daniel, I got a protocol suspended. That's not gray hair territory." Olivia? For Dad it is. He hates fast movers. He spent 30 years building a company that does things slowly and correctly. Daniel, I do things correctly. Slowly is what happens when the reporting chain has too many layers. A pause. Then I'm going to tell him you said that. Daniel, go ahead. Another pause longer. Then are you okay? First day in a new life is a lot. He thought about that. About the desk and the window and the badge with the new title. About Webb and Sandra and Robert on the desk phone. About Lily, waiting at Clement Elementary for a father who had spent 11 years invisible in a maintenance bay and was now something different. Something that didn't yet have a settled shape. He typed, "Ask me in a week. Olivia, fair enough." He closed his phone. He finished his notes. He filed his end-of-day report. Different system now, different format. But the same fundamental act of recording what you found and what it means and what needs to happen next. He was in the parking structure by 5:20. He picked up Lily at 5:41 because the drive from Chicago was longer than from Joliet. She noticed immediately. "You're late," she said. 6 minutes. "That's late." "I'll fix it," he said. She looked at him while she buckled her seatbelt. "How was the new job?" "Busy," he said. "Did you fix things?" "Started to." She nodded, satisfied. In Lily Carter's taxonomy of the world, starting to fix things was an acceptable first-day outcome. They drove home. He made dinner. She talked about the horse she wanted to draw next. Not a regular horse, she explained, but a horse that was also somehow a veterinarian, which was a conceptual challenge she was approaching with full seriousness. He listened. After she was in bed, he sat at the kitchen table with his legal pad and wrote the date at the top and listed every action he'd taken that day in order. Not for anyone else, just for himself. Because he had learned in 11 years of maintenance work that the difference between a system that functions and a system that fails is almost always documentation. He looked at the list one day. 7 items, 3 follow-ups scheduled, 2 approvals received, 1 call from the CEO. He wrote at the bottom, "Tomorrow, the Joliet ventilation installation." Then he went to bed. Tuesday arrived fast and full. The ventilation contractor was at the Joliet hub by 8 o'clock, which Daniel knew, because Marcus texted him a photo of the work crew. Arriving with the caption, "They actually showed up," Daniel responded. "Did you think they wouldn't?" "Marcus, I've been in this bay for 20 years, Danny." Yes, Daniel was in Chicago by 8:30, in back-to-back meetings until noon. The engineering team on Series 7 fleet retrofit scheduling, the IT director on the fatigue system, instant correlation tracker, Webb on the Eastern Hub load securing issue that had been sitting for 6 weeks and was going to stop sitting now. At 12:40, he got a call from the Joliet Hub facilities manager. "The ventilation installation is done," the man said. He sounded slightly stunned, the way people sound when a thing they'd given up on actually happens. "Carbon monoxide levels are within normal range across all 5 bays." "Good," Daniel said. "I want weekly readings sent to my office for the next 2 months." "You want—" "Yes, sir, I'll set that up." He hung up. He texted Marcus. "How's the air?" "Marcus, 3 minutes later, you can actually breathe in here, which is something I forgot was possible." Daniel stared at that for a moment. He thought about 18 months. 18 months of reports and no response, and $62 of his own money, and an alert monitor clipped to a shelf in Bay 4. He thought about the facilities manager, sounding stunned that the work crew showed up. He put his phone away and went back to the Eastern Hub load securing issue, because the ventilation was done, and there was more to fix, and he was not a man who stopped when the first thing got finished. At 2 o'clock, Sandra Park appeared in his doorway. He looked up. Her expression was doing something he hadn't seen from her, yet a specific kind of careful, the look of someone carrying news that is complicated, but not bad. "Close your door," he said. She came in and sat. She put a folder on the desk between them. "Victor Hayes filed a complaint," she said, "this morning. Against you." Daniel did not move. "On what grounds?" "He's claiming that your appointment was retaliatory, that you used your connection to Olivia Bennett to manufacture a personnel situation that resulted in his resignation." She opened the folder. "He's also claiming that the safety reports you filed prior to your appointment were fraudulent, that you exaggerated the fault data to manufacture an emergency." The room was very quiet for a moment. "The engineering team reviewed my Series 7 analysis," Daniel said. They confirmed the fault pattern. I know. The CO monitor in Bay 4 recorded elevated readings for 18 months. That data is timestamped and stored in the hub system. I know. My reports are filed in the system with creation dates and modification logs. They're not editable after filing. I know all of that, Daniel, Sandra said. She looked at him steadily. I need to know if there's anything you haven't told me. Anything about your relationship with Olivia Bennett that could be framed. He looked at her directly. I helped her home from a bar in November because she was alone and nobody else was moving. She slept on my couch. My daughter talked to her in the morning. She texted me to thank me for the coffee. He paused. That is the complete and total relationship. You've been in contact since. She texted me when the meeting cleared, when I accepted the position. Last night to tell me her father had called. He didn't move. Every exchange is on my phone. You can read all of them. Sandra looked at him. I'm not asking to read your messages. I know, he said. I'm telling you anyway. Because you need to understand that there's nothing in them that looks different in the light than it does in the dark. Whatever Victor Hayes is building, he's building it on nothing. Sandra closed the folder. I know that, she said. The complaint has been referred to legal. Gerald Finch is reviewing it. She paused. But I want you to be prepared. Victor has resources. He has connections outside this company. This may not stay internal. Daniel thought about that. He thought about Marcus saying, you don't have the tools for it. He thought about a 40-second video clip in a parking lot and 7 people in a conference room. And Olivia reading 4 pages out loud. What would going external look like, he said. It could mean media, Sandra said. Victor has relationships with 2 business journalists at the Tribune. It could mean a wrongful termination suit, which would force discovery, which would put everything in front of lawyers. She looked at him carefully. It could get loud. Daniel was quiet for a moment. Does Robert Bennett know? He said. He will by end of day. Daniel nodded. Okay, he said. That's it? Okay. What else should I say? He looked at Sandra. I did what I did. The reports are real. The relationship is what I told you it is. If Victor wants to make this loud, I can't stop him from making it loud, but I can make sure that every fact he argues against is documented. He picked up his pen, which is what I'm going to do. Sandra looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face, not surprise, but a kind of recognition. You're not afraid of him, she said. I'm not relaxed about it, Daniel said. But I'm not afraid of him. She stood. She picked up her folder. At the door she turned back and said, for the record, the fatigue override data you sent me. I reviewed it with 2 independent safety consultants this morning. They both said the same thing. What did they say? That it was the most rigorous first-day safety analysis they'd seen from a director-level hire in 20 years. She paused. I thought you should know that. She left. Daniel stared at the door for 3 seconds. Then he called Robert Bennett. Robert picked up on the second ring. Victor Hayes filed a complaint, Daniel said without preamble. I know. Sandra briefed me 20 minutes ago. I want you to hear it from me directly, Daniel said. There is nothing in my relationship with your daughter that is anything other than what it appears to be. If you have any doubt about that, say so now and we can address it. A pause. I don't have any doubt about that, Robert said. Victor's going to try to make this external, Daniel said. Press, possibly litigation. I need to know if this company will stand behind the facts when that happens. Robert was quiet for a moment. Long enough that Daniel felt the weight of it. Daniel, Robert said. Yes, sir. I spent 30 years building this company. I built it on the belief that if you do the work correctly, if you document it carefully, if you tell the truth even when no one is listening, it holds. The structure holds. A pause. Victor Hayes is not the first person who has tried to take something apart from the outside. He will not be the first one who didn't succeed. Neil said, Is that a yes? That is a yes, Robert said. This company stands behind you. Daniel exhaled once quietly and absorbed that. Then I'm going back to the fatigue data, he said. Webb found 3 more overrides in the Western Hub. Go, Robert said. And something in his voice, just underneath the surface, just barely audible, sounded like the specific kind of pride that a man feels when he sees something he built doing what it was supposed to do. Not for his daughter, not for himself. For a maintenance tech from Joliet who filed 3 reports and bought a $62 CO monitor and never once stopped doing the job. Daniel went back to the fatigue data. At 5:07, his cell buzzed. Olivia, Dad told me about Victor. Daniel. Yeah, Olivia, I'm sorry. Daniel. Stop apologizing for things that aren't your fault. Olivia, this one might be partially my fault. Daniel, Victor Hayes is Victor Hayes's fault. Full stop, a pause then. How are you? He thought about it. About the meeting and Sandra, and the complaint, and Robert's voice, saying, this company stands behind you. About the ventilation contractor who showed up this morning. About Marcus texting a photo of the work crew, because he hadn't believed they would come. Daniel, I'm okay, how are you? Olivia, I've been better. I've also been much worse. He thought about McGinty's bar on a November night. About dark brown eyes that were completely unfocused. Daniel, better is better. Olivia, yeah, a pause. I'm going to testify if it goes to litigation. I want you to know that, Daniel. You don't have to. Olivia, I know that. I said I want to. A beat. There's a difference. He stared at the message for a moment. Daniel, I know. Olivia, go home, Daniel. Lily's waiting. He looked at the time. 5:18. He saved his work. He filed his end-of-day notes. He rode the elevator down to the parking structure. He picked up Lily at 5:43. 2 minutes later than yesterday. She noticed. You were late again. 2 minutes. 2 minutes is still late. I'll fix it, he said. You say that every day. And every day I fix it a little bit more, he said. That's how fixing works. She considered this with the serious expression of an 8-year-old encountering a philosophical framework for the first time. Okay, she said, but fix it faster. Deal, he said. They drove home. He made dinner. She finished the horse veterinarian drawing, which was, in his genuinely honest assessment, extraordinary. A horse standing upright at a small desk, wearing glasses, with a stethoscope around its neck and a certificate on the wall that said Horse MD in her careful block letters. He taped it to the refrigerator without comment. She went to bed. He sat at the kitchen table with his legal pad and wrote the date and listed the day in order, the same way he had every day of his professional life, in Bay 4 with a shop rag in his hand, on report forms no one was reading, in a private log that was for no one but himself and the system, and the fundamental belief that what you document is what you protect. He looked at the list. Victor Hayes was out there, with his resources and his Tribune connections, and his complaint filed with Gerald Finch. That was real. The noise that might come was real. But the fatigue data was also real, and the ventilation fix. And Marcus texting a photo of a work crew who had actually shown up. And Sandra's safety consultants saying most rigorous first-day analysis in 20 years. And Robert Bennett saying, this company stands behind you. And Lily's drawing of a horse with a medical degree taped to the refrigerator next to the label that said Bob fixes things. He wrote at the bottom of his list, Victor Hayes can make it loud. But loud isn't the same as true. He closed the legal pad. He turned off the kitchen light. He went to bed in a house that was small and had a soft spot in the linoleum and drawings on the refrigerator. And a savings account that was starting to mean something different than it had 2 weeks ago. And somewhere across the city, in a high-rise office that was dark except for one light, a man named Victor Hayes sat at a desk and stared at a document on his screen and tried to find the angle, the right pressure point, the specific truth he could twist into the shape he needed. He had been good at this for 20 years. He was very good at it. But he had never before tried to dismantle a man who had nothing to hide. And he was beginning to understand, in the specific and unpleasant way that people like Victor Hayes eventually understand things, that a man who has nothing to hide is not the same as a man who has nothing to lose. Daniel Carter had everything to lose. That was the difference. He had chosen to do the right thing anyway. And the right thing, it turned out, had a very long memory. Victor Hayes made his move on a Wednesday. Daniel found out the way he found out most, things that happened outside his direct line of sight from Pete Garza, who had apparently developed a network of informants across the entire Bennett global organizational structure, through what Daniel could only describe as the sheer social force of being genuinely interested in everyone he met. Pete called at 7:40 in the morning, while Daniel was driving Lily to school. I'll call you back in 10 minutes, Daniel said. It's important, Pete said. So is drop-off, 10 minutes. He walked Lily to the front door of Clement Elementary, watched the door close behind her, got back in the truck, and called Pete before he'd even started the engine. Tribune ran something this morning, Pete said. Online. Business section. Daniel was very still. What does it say? Pete read him the headline. Bennett Global's new safety director. Promoted after CEO's daughter incident raises questions about executive favoritism. The article, Pete said, was 4 paragraphs long. It cited an unnamed source close to the company's executive team. It described Daniel's appointment as raising eyebrows among long-term Bennett Global employees and referenced the November incident with Olivia without naming her directly, referring instead to a family member of company leadership. It quoted the unnamed source, saying, the promotion had bypassed standard vetting procedures. Daniel listened to all of it without speaking. Danny, Pete said. You there? I'm here, Daniel said. What do you want to do? Go to work, Daniel said. Same as every day. He started the truck and drove to Chicago. His phone rang 4 times on the drive. Marcus, Webb. A number he didn't recognize. And Olivia, whose name he let go to voicemail because he needed to think before he talked to her, and thinking required silence. He listened to her message in the parking structure of the Bennett Global Tower. Her voice was controlled and precise, the voice she used when she was angry, and choosing not to bun, which he had come to recognize as the most dangerous version of her. She said, I've talked to my father. We're going to respond. Victor's source is almost certainly someone he recruited from inside the company, probably Gerald Finch's office. I want you to know that I'm prepared to go on the record. Full name, full account. No more unnamed sources on our side. A pause. Call me when you're in the building. He got out of the truck. He rode the elevator to the 22nd floor. He called Olivia before he reached his office door. She picked up immediately. Are you okay? She said. I'm fine, he said. Are you on the record? I told you I was. Olivia. He stopped walking. Going on the record about this is going to put your name in the Tribune. It's going to make you part of a story that has your father's company in the headline, and it's going to make Victor Hayes very angry at you specifically. Victor Hayes, she said evenly, has been managing my image for 2 years, through a series of dinners and corporate events designed to position me as his future wife. He has spoken to my father about acquiring a stake in Bennett Global through a marital arrangement. He has treated me for 2 years like a transaction he was managing. Her voice did not waver. He does not get to also be the person who defines this story. I will not allow that. Daniel was quiet for a moment. All right, he said. All right, she said. You've made your decision. It's yours to make. He pushed his office door open. What's the plan? Dad has a communications director named Ellen Marsh. She's already drafting a formal company response. I'm meeting with her at 10. I'd like you there. I'll be there, he said. He sat at his desk. Sandra Park appeared in his doorway 6 minutes later, which meant she'd been watching for him to arrive. You saw the article, she said. Pete Garza called me at 7:40. Sandra came in and sat. Gerald Finch is denying that his office was the source, she said. Convincingly, actually. Which means we may have miscalculated where the leak came from. Daniel looked at her. Who else had access to the complaint Victor filed? The complaint was filed through the HR portal. HR director, her assistant, legal compliance, and the executive committee. Sandra paused. The executive committee has 7 members, one of whom is sympathetic to Victor, Daniel said, or was before he resigned. We're looking at it, Sandra said, but finding the leak is secondary to managing what's already out there. She looked at him steadily. How are you? He thought about what it felt like to sit in his truck in a school parking lot and hear a Tribune headline read aloud to him over the phone. He thought about what it felt like to drive to work afterward anyway. I'm fine, he said. Let's fix the problem. At 10 o'clock, he was in a conference room on the 40th floor with Robert, Olivia, Sandra, and Ellen Marsh, the communications director, who was 50-something, and had the particular energy of a person who has spent 3 traits in organize social crises into manageable narratives and has stopped being surprised by anything. Ellen looked at Daniel when he walked in the way people look at the subject of a headline, assessingly quickly, categorizing. She seemed to reach a conclusion in about 4 seconds. Tell me about Thursday night, she said, in your own words. Everything, he told her, the same way he'd told Robert. the same way he'd have told anyone who asked directly, and deserved a direct answer. She asked 3 follow-up questions. Sharp, precise, the questions of a person who already understood the story and was checking for weak points. Then she said, the 40-second video. Still out there, Daniel said. Victor shared it with the Tribune source before the story ran. They chose not to use it directly, but it's referenced as security footage from the parking area. She looked at him. Is there anything in that video that is worse than what you've told me? No, Daniel said. There's nothing in it that contradicts what I've told you. There's just nothing in it that explains it either. That's what makes it usable, Ellen said. Ambiguity is a tool. Victor knows that. She turned to Olivia. You want to go on the record? Yes, Olivia said. Full name. It will be the lead of the follow-up story. Good, Olivia said. Then people will know who's talking. Ellen looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Robert. We respond today. Formal company statement correcting the factual record on the appointment process, with documentation of the engineering team's review of the Series 7 analysis and the safety audits Daniel has already actioned in his first week. She paused. Olivia's statement runs alongside it, on the record, with her name. Robert said, do it. Ellen started writing. Daniel sat in that room for the next 2 hours, while people far more experienced than him at the mechanics of public narrative did what they did, and he answered questions when asked, and he did not try to direct what he didn't understand, and he did not minimize what was real or inflate what wasn't. At 12:15, Ellen sent the company's statement to the Tribune's business desk. At 12:40, Olivia's personal statement went out through her own public channels, not through the company, not filtered through PR, just her name and her account and her signature. It was 6 paragraphs long. It started, my name is Olivia Bennett. In November, a man I had never met saw me alone on the floor of a bar on Route 30 in Joliet, Illinois, and he helped me. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know who my father was. He helped me because it was the right thing to do, and then he left a note on his own coffee table explaining where the Tylenol was. Daniel read it on his phone at his desk at 12:53. He read it twice. He put his phone face down on the desk and went back to the fatigue data correlation report that Webb needed by Friday, because the work didn't stop for the noise and had never stopped for anything. And that was the only fact about himself that he was completely certain of. At 2:17, his desk phone rang. He picked it up. Carter. It's Gerald Finch, said the voice on the other end. Daniel said nothing, waiting. I want you to know, Finch said, and his voice had the quality of a man choosing his words with the specific care of someone who has spent a career in legal compliance and understands the weight of a statement going on record, that my office did not provide information to the Tribune. I reviewed Victor's complaint, I referred it to legal counsel, and I communicated its existence to the executive committee. That is the limit of my involvement. I hear you, Daniel said. I also want you to know, Finch continued, slower now, that I reviewed the executive committee membership list this morning. One member resigned from the committee effective this morning. His name is Thomas Archer. He and Victor Hayes are members of the same private equity firm. Daniel sat with that. Thank you for telling me, he said. I should have been more careful about who had access to that filing, Finch said. That's on me, and I pause. I want to be on record about it. Directly to you. Daniel thought about Finch in that conference room on Tuesday, nodding too much, asking careful questions about process and liability. He thought about the specific kind of courage it takes for a man who has spent his career on the careful side of every line to pick up a phone and say, that's on me. Appreciated, Daniel said. I mean that. Finch hung up. Daniel called Sandra, told her about Archer. She already knew Ellen's team had found it 20 minutes earlier through a different channel. By 4 o'clock, Thomas Archer's connection to Victor Hayes' private equity firm had been confirmed and was sitting in a legal brief that Gerald Finch had personally drafted and sent to the Tribune's editorial desk, offering it as context for the original story. At 4:47, the Tribune updated the online piece with a correction and a note. A previous version of this article cited a source later identified as having a direct financial relationship with the subject of the personnel complaint. The article has been updated to reflect this conflict of interest. Daniel read it at his desk. He read it the way he read everything. Completely, in order. Then he saved the page. He sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling of his office, a regular drop-tile ceiling, the kind that exists in every mid-level corporate office in America. Unremarkable, institutional. Nothing like the view Robert Bennett had from the 40th floor. He liked it fine. At 5:02 his cell buzzed. Olivia Tribune posted a correction. Daniel, I saw. Olivia, Victor called my father this afternoon. Asked to meet. Daniel, what did your father say? Olivia, he said he had nothing to say to him that Gerald Finch hadn't already put in writing. A pause. Then it's over, Daniel. He looked at that for a moment. Daniel, is it? Olivia, the litigation threat evaporated when Archer's conflict came out. Victor has no credible source and a documented motive. Gerald told me. His legal counsel advised him this morning to withdraw the complaint. Olivia, not yet. But he will. He thought about Victor Hayes at a dark desk on Tuesday night, looking for the angle, the pressure point, the truth he could twist into a shape he needed. He thought about what it cost to be that kind of man. The constant calculation, the energy of it. Daniel, good. Olivia, that's all you have to say? Daniel, what else should I say? Olivia, most people would say something more. Daniel, most people weren't filing break reports for 8 weeks that nobody was reading. I've got practice not celebrating until the thing is actually fixed. A longer pause. He could feel her smiling through the screen, which was a strange thing to feel, but he felt it. Olivia, go home, walk Lily to the door. Daniel, already packing up. He closed his laptop. He filed his end-of-day report. He rode the elevator down. He picked up Lily at 5:41. 1 minute closer to on time, she noticed. Better, she said, with the magnanimity of a child granting a partial pardon. Working on it, he said. They drove home. He made spaghetti, which was her requested meal for every occasion. Good days, bad days, days when the world was complicated and needed something familiar in the middle of it. She sat at the kitchen table and told him about a boy in her class named Marcus. Not his Marcus, just a coincidence of names, who had gotten in trouble for drawing on the classroom window with a dry erase marker. Was the drawing good? Daniel asked. She considered this seriously. It was a pretty good horse, she said. That's why he got caught. Mrs. Paulson stopped to look at it, and then remembered she was supposed to be upset. Daniel laughed. It arrived unexpectedly, the way real laughs do, and filled the kitchen with a sound that had been infrequent enough in this house that Lily looked up with wide eyes like she was witnessing a weather event. What? She said. Nothing, he said. Eat your spaghetti. She ate her spaghetti with the expression of a child who knows she's been told nothing useful but is willing to accept it for now. After dinner, after dishes, after the horse veterinarian's new patient, apparently a horse with a broken leg that needed surgery, which Lily was illustrating with clinical detail, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his legal pad and wrote the date at the top and listed the day. He got to the end of the list. He looked at it. 3 weeks ago, he had been a maintenance tech in Joliet who filed reports that nobody read and bought his own safety equipment and walked his daughter to a school door every morning because she liked it. And that was his life. And most days it was enough. Tonight he was a director of operational safety, with a fatigue reporting override system suspended across 4 regional hubs, a ventilation fix completed in Bay 4, a cross-hub reporting protocol in draft that Webb had called the most sensible structural proposal he'd seen in 5 years, a correction on a Tribune article, and a company that had, when it mattered, stood behind the facts. And he still walked his daughter to the school door. Every morning. He wrote at the bottom of the list, not because anyone would read it, not because it needed to be said, just because it was true, and because he had always believed that what you write down is what you protect. The work was always there. The work was always real. It just needed someone to be in the room who had read it. He closed the legal pad. He heard Lily call from the living room. Bah. Come see, he went. She held up the drawing. The horse veterinarian's patient was a second horse, slightly smaller, with its leg wrapped in a careful bandage and a look of dignified suffering. The horse doctor was examining it with a stethoscope. On the wall behind them, next to the horse MD certificate, there was now a second certificate. He leaned in and read it. It said, "Best doctor fixes things." He looked at his daughter. She looked at him with the calm certainty of an 8-year-old who has said a true thing and knows it. "For the refrigerator," she said. He took it. He put it on the refrigerator. He stood back and looked at the full collection, the truck with the arrow, the horses, the woman with the ginger ale that had been coffee, the stick figure in the plaid shirt labeled "Ba Fixes Things," and now the horse doctor with the certificate that said, "Best doctor, fixes things." He stood there for a long moment. He did not cry. He was not a man who cried easily, and this was not one of those moments. But there was something in him. Standing in front of a refrigerator covered in drawings in a small house with a soft spot in the linoleum, that was very close to the feeling underneath, crying the place the feeling comes from. Bored, it becomes something visible. He thought about Susan. He thought about what she would make of all of this. The bar, and the couch, and the 40th floor, and the Tribune correction, and the horse with the medical degree. He thought that she would have laughed first, and then gotten very serious, and then said something precise that he would carry for years. He thought she would have said, "You've always fixed things, Daniel. You just finally have a room big enough to do it in." He went to bed. The next morning, he walked Lily to the front door of Clement Elementary at 7:53. On time. She pushed through without looking back. He stood at the truck for a moment. 3 weeks ago, this was the whole of the possible world, this moment. This door. This drive to work in a truck with a cracked passenger mirror. He had not been unhappy with it. He had known what it was, and he had known it wasn't nothing. But it was smaller than this. He drove to Chicago. He was in his office by 8:22, reading Webb's updated Eastern Hub report, when his desk phone rang. He picked it up. "Carter, it's Robert. Good morning." "Victor Hayes withdrew the complaint this morning," Robert said. "Gerald Finch notified me at 8 o'clock. Olivia told me last night it was coming," Daniel said. "I know. She told me too." A pause that had something in it. Daniel had not heard from Robert before, a kind of lightness, the specific weight of a man who has put something down. "I want to talk to you about something. Not a work thing." Daniel waited. "I have a house in Lake Geneva," Rob said, "for Thanksgiving. We do it every year, or we used to when Olivia and I were—" He stopped. "It's been 3 years since she came. She told me last week she'd like to come this year." Another pause. She asked if she could bring a guest. Daniel was very still. She said, "You have a daughter who likes horses," Robert said. "I have 2 horses in Barrington. They could come to Geneva for the weekend." The office was quiet. Daniel said, "Mr. Bennett," Robert said. "Robert." He tried the name. It fit differently than he expected. "I appreciate the invitation. But I need to be clear about something. Whatever is or isn't developing between your daughter and me, that's separate from the job. It has to stay separate. I need you to understand that before anything else." Robert was quiet for a moment. "I understand that," he said. "And if it ever becomes a problem," Daniel said, "if there's ever a moment where someone looks at a decision I've made and has a legitimate question about whether it's been influenced by something personal, I need the authority to have that reviewed independently. I need that in writing." Another pause. "You're asking me to build a firewall around your own position. I'm asking you to protect the work," Daniel said. "The work is what matters, not the title, not the relationship. The 61 Series 7 trucks and the fatigue data and the ventilation in Bay 4. That's what I'm here for." Robert was silent for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "I built this company for 30 years without ever meeting a man who asked me to protect the work before protecting himself." Daniel didn't say anything. "I'll have legal draft the independent review provision this week," Robert said. "And the invitation stands. Lily is welcome. The horses are patient," Daniel said. "I'll ask her." He already knew what she would say. She would say yes with a volume that would startle everyone in the vicinity. She would draw a picture in preparation. She would ask 17 questions about what horses eat for breakfast, and whether they had names, and whether she could touch their faces. He would bring her. But first he would finish the fatigue data report, and the cross-hub protocol, and the CO monitoring expansion that Webb had flagged for the Western Hub, and the quarterly safety presentation for the executive committee that he was building from scratch, without precedent, because there had never been a director of operational safety at Bennett Global before, and therefore Everything he built would be the first version of what it was. That was fine. He was used to first versions. He had filed 3 of them before anyone read the first one. At noon, he called Marcus. Marcus picked up on the second ring with background noise. That meant he was in the bay, which was where Marcus always was at noon, because Marcus ate his lunch standing at his face the same way Daniel had for 11 years. "How's the air?" Daniel said. "Still breathable," Marcus said. "Which I'm not going to get used to. Too many years of the alternative." A pause. "How are you?" "Good," Daniel said. Victor withdrew the complaint. "I heard," Marcus said. "Pete has sources I don't understand and don't want to." Daniel laughed, the second real one in 2 days, which was a rate he hadn't achieved in a while. "How's the Series 7 retrofit going?" "Engineering team came through yesterday. All 18 units in Joliet are scheduled." Marcus paused. "You know what happened when the engineering team walked into this bay, Danny? First time any of them had been here in 2 years? What? 2 of my guys asked if they were from corporate. Like it was a visitation. Like something had changed, and they weren't sure what." Daniel was quiet for a moment. "Something changed," he said. "Yeah," Marcus said. "Something changed." A pause, and his voice shifted it into the register of a man saying something that has been sitting with him. "I'm proud of you. I want to say it out loud because I don't say it enough. You were always the best person in this bay. Now, you're the best person in a bigger room. That's how it's supposed to work." Daniel held the phone. "Thank you, Marcus," he said. Not quickly, not to move past it. Just those 3 words held steady. "Go fix something," Marcus said. "Stop talking to me." He went back to work. The afternoon moved fast. A call with IT about the incident correlation tracker that was going live on Monday. A review meeting with Sandra on the Eastern Hub load securing protocol. A brief conversation with Ellen Marsh, who wanted to let him know that 3 trade publications had picked up the Tribune correction story and that the framing was, in her words, significantly more favorable than what we started with. At 4:15, he got a text from Olivia. "Olivia, he called you, didn't he? About Thanksgiving, Olivia? And?" "Daniel, I said I'd ask Lily." A pause. "Then she's going to say yes, so loud people in adjacent counties will know." "Daniel, probably." "Olivia, are you okay with it?" "Really?" He thought about really. He thought about what it meant to be okay, with something, not resigned to it, not cautious about it, but genuinely settled in it. He thought about a couch, with a blanket and a note about Tylenol and 2 figures in a child's drawing sitting side by side, connected by something that hadn't needed to be named, because 8-year-olds don't name things that are simply obvious. "Daniel?" "Yes." "Olivia?" "Okay." A pause. "Lily should know the horses' names are Harold and Gerald." "Daniel." "That's the most corporate set of horse names I've ever heard." "Olivia, Dad named them." "What did you expect?" He smiled. He put his phone down. He finished the day. He picked up Lily. He told her in the car. On Route 30, the same road that ran past McGinty's bar, where 3 weeks ago everything had begun because he had looked up from a bar counter and seen a woman on the floor, and nobody moving. He told Lily they'd been invited to Thanksgiving at a house in Lake Geneva. With horses. She turned to look at him. Her eyes were very wide. "Horses," she said. "2 of them," he said, "named Harold and Gerald." There was a silence of about 4 seconds, while she processed the magnitude of this. Then she screamed. Not in distress, in the specific frequency of a child receiving the exact right thing at the exact right moment, the sound of joy that has nowhere else to go and doesn't need to. He let her. He drove them home through the late November afternoon, on a road he had driven 10,000 times, past the bar where it had started, past the gas station where she'd been sick in the rain, past the junction at Route 30, through the streets of Joliet, down Millbrook Lane. Home. The house was small. The linoleum had a soft spot. The refrigerator was covered in drawings. He had 3 months of savings and a new salary he hadn't finished believing in yet, and a daughter who was now drawing Harold and Gerald before she'd even met them, with the confident certainty of an artist who doesn't wait for permission to begin. He had reports he'd filed that had finally been read. People whose lives were safer tonight than they had been a month ago, because he had bought a $62 CO monitor and filed 3 versions of the same analysis and kept going to work in the morning, even when the morning held nothing but the same quiet certainty that the job was worth doing because it was the right job. He had a woman in Lincoln Park who had folded a note into the pocket of a silk dress and kept it, and who had read 4 pages out loud in a room full of people who needed to hear it, and who was not asking him for anything except the same thing he had given her, from the beginning: honesty and presence, and the specific decency of a man who shows up. And he had Lily, who was drawing horses named Harold and Gerald at the kitchen table with the absolute creative authority of someone who has never once doubted that the world will eventually provide what you need, if you're patient and if you love the right things with enough constancy. That was enough. That was more than enough. That was, if he was being honest, and he was always honest, it was the only way he knew how to be anything that was everything. He stood in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen and looked at his daughter drawing horses at the kitchen table under the kitchen light. And he did not reach for anything beyond this moment, because this moment was complete. It had been earned in the only way anything is ever really earned, slowly, quietly, correctly, with no audience and no guarantee and no certainty of return. Daniel Carter had spent 11 years being the man that nobody noticed. And in noticing the woman that nobody else moved to help, in that one ordinary act of basic human decency, on a rainy November night on Route 30, he had become, without trying, without posturing, without performing any version of himself that wasn't the only version he'd ever had, exactly who he had always been. The kind of man who sees someone on the floor and moves. The kind of man who leaves a note. The kind of man who files the report 3 times. The kind of man who buys the monitor himself. The kind of man whose daughter draws him with a certificate on the wall that says best doctor. Fixes things. Because she has known, from the beginning, the one true thing about her father that the world took 11 years to figure out. He fixes things. Not because anyone is watching. Not because there is reward at the end, but because the thing is broken and he is there, and he knows how, and that has always been reason enough. That will always be reason enough. That is the whole of it, and it is enough to build a life on, and he has, and it stands.